At exactly 8:17 on the first morning of my marriage, my phone vibrated. I smiled without even opening my eyes. The room still carried the scent of fresh roses from the bridal bouquet someone had placed on the nightstand the night before. Golden sunlight slipped through the curtains of the honeymoon suite, painting soft patterns across the white bedspread. For one perfect moment, life felt exactly the way I'd always imagined it would. I stretched my hand across the bed, expecting to feel my husband's shoulder. Instead, my fingers touched nothing but cold sheets. I smiled anyway. Daniel was probably downstairs getting coffee. He knew I couldn't function without coffee. Every anniversary, every birthday, every important morning in our relationship, he had always been the first one awake. He loved surprising me, so I wasn't worried, not yet. My phone vibrated again. I reached over lazily, expecting another flood of congratulations. Our wedding hashtag had been trending among our friends since midnight. People had been posting pictures nonstop. Best wedding ever. You two are perfect together. Couple goals. I laughed quietly as I unlocked my phone. Then, everything inside me stopped. There was no greeting, no name, just one photograph. A photograph of Daniel, my husband, still wearing the same white dress shirt he'd worn beneath his tuxedo, walking out of another hotel. His arm wasn't at his side. It was wrapped around a woman, a beautiful blonde woman wearing a silver evening dress. She wasn't pulling away. She was leaning toward him, smiling, like she belonged beside him, like they had just shared a night together. Underneath the photograph, only 7 words. Ask your husband where he spent the night. For several seconds, I forgot how to breathe. People often imagine heartbreak as something loud, screaming, crying, things breaking against walls. They imagine dramatic music and impossible choices. Real heartbreak isn't like that. Real heartbreak is quiet. It's the sound of your heartbeat becoming louder than everything around you. It's staring at a photograph while your mind desperately searches for another explanation. Anything except the truth. No, I whispered to myself. This has to be fake. I zoomed in. The watch on Daniel's wrist. The one I'd given him on his 30th birthday. The cufflinks engraved with our wedding date. His wedding ring. Everything matched. This wasn't an old picture. It wasn't artificial intelligence. It wasn't someone who merely resembled him. It was Daniel, my husband, less than 12 hours after promising to spend forever with me. My name is Claire Bennett, 31 years old, marketing director, daughter, sister. Until about 3 minutes earlier, her wife. If someone had asked me 24 hours before whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation, with every part of my heart, yes, absolutely, without question. Because trust wasn't something Daniel had demanded, it was something he'd earned, one ordinary day at a time. We met almost 4 years earlier, not at a party, not through friends, not on a dating app. We met because I accidentally spilled an entire caramel latte onto him. It was one of those impossibly busy Monday mornings. I was already late for an important presentation. My laptop bag slipped from my shoulder as I rushed into a small neighborhood cafe. Someone opened the door at exactly the wrong moment. The coffee flew straight into the chest of the man walking in. "Oh my God!" I gasped. "I'm so sorry." Hot coffee dripped from his navy blue sweater. I expected anger. Instead, he looked down at himself, then started laughing. "I guess this means your morning is worse than mine." I blinked. "What?" He smiled. "Nobody who spills coffee like that is having a good day." Despite everything, I laughed too. "I'll pay for the cleaning." He shook his head. "Only if you let me buy you another coffee." I stared at him. "I just ruined yours." "I know, so technically, I'm still ahead." That was Daniel. Even our first conversation somehow ended with him making sure I smiled. Our first date lasted nearly 6 hours. Not because we'd planned it, because neither of us noticed how much time had passed. We talked about childhood memories, favorite books, terrible jobs we'd worked during college, travel dreams, family traditions. The waiter refilled our coffee 3 times before finally laughing. "You two realize we're closing, right?" Daniel looked at his watch, then back at me. "I think we accidentally skipped lunch." We had. and neither of us cared. The months that followed were wonderfully ordinary. Daniel wasn't flashy. He never tried to impress people. He didn't post expensive dinners online. He didn't care about designer clothes. His love language wasn't grand gestures. It was consistency. Every Tuesday evening, he showed up at my apartment carrying fresh flowers from the little market near his office. Not because Tuesday meant anything, simply because he'd noticed flowers made me smile after difficult workdays. Whenever my mother needed help with groceries, he somehow arrived before I even asked. When my sister Emily's car broke down during a snowstorm, Daniel drove 2 hours after work to help her. He never announced the good things he did. He simply did them. My mother adored him. "That young man," she often whispered after family dinners, "has a peaceful heart." I believed she was right. About a year into our relationship, life tested us. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. Everything became hospital visits, medical reports, chemotherapy schedules, fear. The kind of fear that quietly follows you everywhere. I expected Daniel to become overwhelmed. Instead, he somehow became even stronger. Every treatment day, he took time off work. He drove Mom to every appointment, sat beside her for hours, played cards with her while I handled paperwork. One afternoon, I found him quietly reading one of her favorite mystery novels aloud because the medication made it difficult for her to concentrate. Mom smiled when she saw me. "You picked a good one." She whispered it softly, almost like a secret. "I know," I whispered back. "I really did." When my mother finally went into remission, Daniel didn't celebrate himself. He simply hugged her, then quietly stepped outside to let us have our family moment. That's who I married, or at least, who I believed I married. 2 years later, he proposed, not at a fancy restaurant, not on television, not surrounded by strangers. He took me back to the tiny cafe where we'd first met. The owner still remembered us. He even joked, "Please don't throw coffee this time." Daniel laughed, then reached into his jacket pocket. "I've had this ring for 3 months. I stared at him. 3 months? I wanted the timing to be perfect. He looked around the little cafe. "This is where the best thing that ever happened to me began." Then he knelt. "Claire, you've made every ordinary day feel extraordinary. I don't promise perfection. I don't promise life will always be easy. But I promise, I'll never stop choosing you." People around us quietly applauded as I nodded through tears. Yes, it was the easiest answer I'd ever given. Planning our wedding became one of the happiest seasons of my life. Mom insisted on helping choose flowers. Emily obsessed over seating charts. My best friend Olivia somehow turned every stressful decision into something funny. Daniel surprised me almost daily. One evening he arrived carrying an old wooden box. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, one for every anniversary. The first anniversary, the 5th, the 10th, the 25th, even one labeled, "Open when we're old and gray." I laughed through tears. "You already wrote all these?" He nodded. "So no matter what happens, you'll always know how much I love you." Looking back, that memory hurts more than almost anything else, because no one writes letters like that unless they believe every word. Didn't they? Our wedding day arrived beneath a cloudless summer sky. Everything looked exactly as we'd imagined. White roses lined the aisle. A small string quartet played softly beneath the oak trees. Friends traveled from different states just to celebrate with us. Mom cried before the ceremony even started. Emily laughed at her, then started crying too. Even I couldn't stop smiling, until one tiny moment that seemed meaningless at the time. About 20 minutes before the ceremony, I noticed Daniel standing alone near the garden. His back was turned, his phone pressed tightly against his ear. His shoulders looked tense, almost frightened. As I started walking toward him, he quickly ended the call, then smiled, a little too quickly. "You okay?" I asked. He kissed my forehead. "Just work." I frowned. "On our wedding day?" He forced a laugh. "I know, terrible timing." Then he wrapped his arms around me. "So, ready to become my wife?" I smiled. More than anything, if I'd arrived 30 seconds earlier, would I have heard the conversation? Would everything have changed? I'll never know. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Daniel's hands trembled as he held mine. his eyes filled with tears while reading his vows. I promise to protect your heart, to never keep secrets that could hurt us, and to face every problem beside you. Everyone applauded. Even the minister smiled. My mother whispered afterward, I've never seen a groom look at a bride the way Daniel looks at you. Neither had I. Which is why what happened next made no sense at all. The reception lasted until nearly 1 in the morning. People danced, laughed, shared embarrassing childhood stories. Daniel looked genuinely happy, but every now and then, I caught him checking his phone. His best man, Mark, looked unusually anxious. Once, I even saw them arguing quietly near the bar. The moment they noticed me, both men stopped talking. Daniel walked over immediately, pulled me close, kissed my forehead. Everything okay? I asked. He smiled. Perfect. One word, one lie, or perhaps one desperate hope that everything would somehow still be okay. Around 1:30, we finally arrived at our honeymoon suite. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Someone had scattered rose petals across the bed. A bottle of champagne waited in a silver bucket. Daniel loosened his tie, then sat silently on the edge of the bed. He looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. I sat beside him. You survived, I teased gently. He smiled. Barely. Then, after several long seconds, he quietly whispered something that would haunt me forever. Claire, if I ever disappointed you, I hope you'd let me explain before deciding who I really am. I looked at him, confused. What kind of question is that? He stared at the floor, then forced a smile. Forget it. I'm just tired. I kissed his cheek. We're married now. We don't have to be afraid anymore. He looked at me for a long time, then softly answered, I hope you're right. I fell asleep, believing tomorrow would be the first day of the happiest chapter of my life. Instead, at exactly 8:17 the next morning, my phone buzzed. And 7 words destroyed everything. I must have looked at that photograph 100 times, maybe more. Every time I zoomed in, I hoped to find something that proved it wasn't real. A shadow, a reflection, a bad edit, anything. Instead, I noticed details I'd missed before. Daniel's wedding ring reflected the morning sunlight. The same silver tie clip he'd worn at our reception was still attached to his shirt. Even the small coffee stain near his cuff, the one I'd accidentally made while teasing him during dinner, was still there. It wasn't an old photograph. It had been taken only hours earlier, while I had been asleep believing my husband was lying beside me. My hands began to tremble. No, I whispered. There has to be an explanation. Just then, the bathroom door opened. Steam drifted into the room. Daniel stepped out, wearing nothing but a white towel around his waist. His hair was still wet. He smiled the same warm smile I'd fallen in love with 4 years earlier. Morning, beautiful. I found the hotel's coffee menu. They make your favorite hazelnut latte. I couldn't answer. He immediately noticed. His smile faded. Claire? I slowly held up my phone. Who is she? For a brief second, I saw something flash across his face. Not guilt, not anger, fear. Pure, unmistakable fear. He walked toward me slowly. What are you talking about? Without speaking, I turned the phone around. He stared at the photograph. His entire body froze. The color drained from his face. His lips parted slightly. For nearly 10 seconds, he didn't say a single word. Then, very quietly, he whispered, Oh God. I stood. So it's real. His eyes shot toward me. No, it happened. I can see that. I mean, he rubbed both hands over his face. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Do you know what I think? I think my husband disappeared on our wedding night, and someone photographed him leaving another hotel with another woman. He opened his mouth, closed it again. The silence became unbearable. Say something, I almost shouted. Please, anything. He finally looked at me. I need you to trust me. I couldn't believe those were the first words out of his mouth. I stared at him in disbelief. Trust you? I married you yesterday. I trusted you more than anyone in this world. And now this is the first morning of our marriage. I held up the phone again. So tell me, who is she? He looked down at the floor. Then he stopped. It was as if invisible hands had wrapped around his throat. My heart sank. People don't struggle this much when the truth is simple. They struggle when every answer creates another problem. Finally, he spoke. Her name is Ava. The name hit me harder than I expected. Not because I knew her, because now she had a name. She wasn't just a stranger anymore. She was real. I swallowed. How do you know her? Another pause. We met years ago. Years? Years? My heartbeat quickened. Before me? He nodded. Yes. Were you together? He looked away. For a while. I felt the room spinning. So your ex spent your wedding night with you? No, he answered so quickly that even I believed him. No, it wasn't like that. I stepped backward. Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I forced myself to stay. If you expect me to believe this picture means nothing, you're going to have to tell me everything. He slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. His hands were shaking now. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. I've been trying to protect you. Those words made me angry. I didn't ask to be protected. I asked for the truth. Before he could answer, his phone rang. The screen lit up. Mark, his best man. Daniel stared at it, didn't answer. It rang again, then again. Finally, he silenced it. I frowned. Why is Mark calling you over and over? I don't know. Really? He hesitated, then quietly admitted. He knows. My stomach tightened. He knows what? The photograph. I stared at him. How? Daniel closed his eyes. Because he warned me this might happen. The room suddenly felt much smaller. What do you mean? Might happen. He looked at me with exhausted eyes. I can't explain until I know who sent it. My voice became colder. You've had all night. Apparently, I've had 8 minutes, so start explaining. At that exact moment, someone knocked on our hotel room door. 3 slow knocks. Daniel and I looked at each other. Neither of us moved. Another knock. Then a familiar voice. Daniel? It was Mark. Daniel exhaled heavily. I should open it. You absolutely should. Mark stepped inside carrying 2 paper coffee cups. The moment he saw my face, he stopped smiling. You've seen it. I folded my arms. So you knew? He looked toward Daniel, then back at me. I hoped she wouldn't. I laughed in disbelief. Oh, that's comforting. So everyone knew except the bride? Mark placed the coffee on the table. It isn't that simple. It never is, I replied sharply. The room became painfully quiet. Finally, Mark spoke. The woman in the photo wanted this. I frowned. What? She wanted Claire to receive that picture. Daniel nodded slowly. She's been threatening me for months. Every emotion inside me stopped. Threatening? Threatening him? Why? Start at the beginning, I said quietly. No more half-truths. Daniel took a long breath. 3 years ago, I invested money into a technology startup. It failed. I lost almost everything I'd saved. I frowned. I know about that. He nodded. But I never told you who convinced me to invest. Ava? Yes. So she's angry because she lost money? No. His answer came immediately. Then why? He looked toward Mark. Mark reluctantly answered. Because Ava believes Daniel owes her something much bigger. I felt another wave of dread. What? Neither man answered. I looked from one to the other. What? Finally, Daniel whispered. Her brother. I blinked. I don't understand. Mark slowly sat down, then looked directly into my eyes. Claire. Ava believes Daniel is responsible for her brother's death. The words hung in the room like smoke. For several seconds, I couldn't even process them. What? Daniel looked devastated. I've spent 3 years trying to prove I wasn't. Nothing made sense anymore. 1 minute, I thought my husband had cheated. Now, someone was accusing him of causing a man's death. Which was worse? I honestly didn't know. I looked at Daniel. Tell me the truth. All of it. He nodded slowly. I will. But once I start, everything you believe about the last 3 years is going to change. I stared into the eyes of the man I'd married less than 24 hours earlier. For the first time, I realized I didn't actually know the biggest chapter of his life. And somehow, I feared the truth far more than the photograph. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The honeymoon suite that had been filled with laughter only hours before now felt colder than any room I'd ever entered. I looked from Daniel to Mark and back again. Someone was lying. I just didn't know who. Finally, I broke the silence. Start from the beginning. Daniel nodded slowly. Every single detail. I looked directly into his eyes. If this marriage is going to survive, I deserve every single truth. He closed his eyes for a moment, then began. It started almost 4 years ago, just before you and I met. I'd just been promoted to senior financial analyst. It was the biggest opportunity of my career. I was ambitious. I wanted to prove myself. He gave a bitter smile. I also thought I was smarter than everyone else. Mark quietly looked toward the floor. Daniel continued. My company partnered with a technology startup. The founder was brilliant. His name was Ryan Morgan. The name immediately caught my attention. Ryan? Ava's brother? Daniel nodded. Yes. He was only 29, but everyone believed he'd become one of the youngest tech CEOs in the country. What happened? Daniel's expression darkened. He trusted the wrong investors. Daniel stood and slowly walked toward the window. Outside, newly married couples were checking out of the hotel, laughing, holding hands, completely unaware that my own honeymoon had become an interrogation. Ryan borrowed millions trying to keep the company alive, Daniel said quietly. He convinced several investors to stay. I believed in him. So did dozens of other people. What we didn't know was that someone inside the company had been stealing money. I frowned. So Ryan wasn't responsible? No, he was covering losses he didn't even know existed. Mark finally spoke. By the time Ryan discovered the fraud, it was already too late. What happened to him? I asked. Daniel swallowed hard. He disappeared. For 3 days. No one could find him. My heartbeat slowed, then very softly. Daniel continued. They found his car near a cliff. No note. No witnesses. No answers. I covered my mouth. Oh my God. The police ruled it a suicide, but Ava refused to believe it. Daniel slowly turned back toward me. She blamed everyone connected to the company, the investors, the executives, the accountants, and me. Why you? I asked. Because I was the last person Ryan met before he disappeared. The room became silent again. I tried to imagine it. A frightened young entrepreneur, a collapsing company, millions of dollars missing, one final meeting, one missing man, then a grieving sister searching for someone to blame. It almost made sense. Almost. So she sent the photograph? I think so, Daniel answered. But, he hesitated. I don't think she acted alone. Just then, Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, a text message. He looked at the screen. His face immediately changed. What? I asked. Without speaking, he handed me the phone. The message contained only one sentence. The wedding was just the beginning. No name, no explanation, just another threat. A chill ran through my body. Whoever was doing this wasn't finished. Mark immediately grabbed his jacket. I'm calling the police. Daniel stopped him. No. I stared at him. No. They won't do anything with anonymous texts. They'll just tell us to block the number. Mark shook his head. This isn't about the phone anymore. It's escalating. I watched the two men carefully. They weren't acting like someone covering up an affair. They were acting like men who genuinely believed someone was watching them. By noon, our honeymoon was officially over. Instead of boarding a plane to Italy, we drove home in complete silence. The radio stayed off. Neither of us touched the snacks we'd packed for the trip. Every few minutes, I caught Daniel looking into the rearview mirror, checking if someone was following us. Maybe he was becoming paranoid. Or maybe he had a reason to be. When we pulled into our driveway, something immediately felt wrong. The front gate was open. Daniel always locked it. Always. He quickly stepped out of the car. Stay here. I am not staying in the car, I answered, already opening my door. Together, we walked toward the front porch. Nothing appeared missing. No broken windows. No damaged locks. Then I noticed it. A single white envelope taped to the front door. No stamp, no address, just one handwritten word. Claire. My stomach tightened. Daniel carefully removed it. Inside was another photograph. This one was older. 3 years old, judging by Daniel's haircut. He stood beside Ryan. Both men were smiling, shaking hands. Across the photograph, someone had written in thick black marker, "You helped kill him." I looked at Daniel. His face had gone completely pale. "I've never seen this before," he whispered. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Daniel eventually drifted off beside me, or at least, pretended to. Around 2 in the morning, I quietly slipped out of bed. Something inside me refused to accept everything at face value. I opened my laptop, typed Ryan Morgan's name into the search bar. Thousands of results appeared. Old newspaper articles, business magazines, television interviews. Then, one article caught my attention. Missing CEO's company had internal fraud. Investigation reopened. My pulse quickened. The article was published almost 18 months after Ryan's death. I clicked it. According to investigators, millions of dollars had been transferred into offshore accounts. Money Ryan never authorized. The case had quietly reopened. Then, just as quietly, closed again. No arrests, no suspects, no explanation. I leaned back in my chair. Something wasn't right. If investigators believed Ryan hadn't stolen the money, then why was Daniel still carrying all the blame? The next morning, I drove somewhere without telling Daniel. The cemetery. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe I wanted to understand the people whose lives had somehow become connected to mine. Ryan Morgan's grave sat beneath a large maple tree. Fresh flowers rested beside the headstone. Someone had visited recently. As I turned to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. A woman stood only a few feet away. Long blonde hair, black coat, cold blue eyes. I recognized her instantly. The woman from the photograph. Ava. She looked at me without anger, without kindness, simply with sadness. "So," she said quietly, "you're the woman he married." I nodded carefully. "Yes." She glanced toward her brother's grave. "I warned him this day would come." I felt my heartbeat pounding. "What do you want from Daniel?" Her eyes slowly met mine. "I don't want his money. I don't want revenge. I want the truth." I frowned. "What truth?" She stepped closer, close enough that I could hear her breathing. "The wrong man buried my brother." Then she whispered 7 words. The same 7 words that would shatter everything I believed. "Daniel isn't the man you should fear." She turned, walked away, and disappeared between the rows of headstones. I stood there frozen. If Daniel wasn't the real enemy, then who was? And why did it feel like someone had been manipulating all of us from the very beginning? I didn't tell Daniel about meeting Ava. Not immediately. For the entire drive home from the cemetery, her last sentence echoed inside my head. "Daniel isn't the man you should fear." If she truly hated him, why warn me? Why not let me continue believing he was the villain? Nothing made sense anymore, and somehow, that frightened me more than the photograph ever had. When I walked into our house, Daniel was pacing across the living room. The moment he saw me, relief washed over his face. "Where have you been?" I hesitated. I needed time to think. He stopped walking. "You disappeared." I called 12 times. I looked down at my phone. It was still on silent. "I wasn't trying to scare you." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "I'm sorry. He rubbed his forehead. "I don't want anything happening to you." The words sounded sincere, but after everything that had happened, I no longer knew how to separate sincerity from secrets. That evening, I finally told him. I met Ava. His face lost all color. "You what?" "At Ryan's grave." He stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward. "Claire, you should never meet her alone." "Why?" "Because she thinks you're protecting me." I stared at him. "And are you worth protecting?" The question hung between us. "Finally," he answered, "I honestly don't know anymore." For the first time since our wedding, Daniel opened the locked drawer of his office desk. Inside were dozens of folders, newspaper clippings, legal documents, financial statements, police reports. I looked at him in disbelief. "You've kept all this? Every piece, every article, every accusation." He handed me the first folder. "I was hoping I'd never have to show you." For nearly 3 hours, we sat together reading Ryan's company records, bank statements, internal audit reports. The more I read, the less guilty Ryan appeared. Millions had vanished. Yet none of the missing transfers carried his digital authorization. Someone had forged approvals. Someone with executive-level access. Someone who understood financial systems. I looked toward Daniel. If Ryan didn't move the money, who did? Daniel quietly shook his head. "That's exactly what I've been trying to prove." Then something caught my eye. One signature, repeated across multiple approval forms. It wasn't Ryan's. It wasn't Daniel's. It belonged to someone named Victor Hale. I frowned. "Who is Victor?" Daniel looked at the papers. His expression immediately changed. He was Ryan's business partner. I continued reading. Chief Operating Officer, minority shareholder, authorized financial controller. My heartbeat quickened. He had access to every account. Daniel slowly nodded. "Yes, but investigators never charged him." "Why not?" "Because by the time the fraud was discovered, Victor had already resigned." I looked through another folder, then another. Suddenly, I froze. A newspaper interview. Victor Hale smiling confidently beside reporters. The article described him as a successful entrepreneur who had launched another technology company only months after Ryan's death. Something didn't feel right. I picked up my laptop, typed his name into a business registry. Within seconds, my eyes widened. "Daniel," he looked over. "What?" Victor's new company was funded 2 months after Ryan disappeared. Daniel leaned closer. "How much?" I swallowed. $28 million. The room became silent. Neither of us had to say what we were both thinking. The next morning, I visited Mark. If anyone knew Daniel's past, it was him. Mark welcomed me inside without asking questions. "I figured you'd come." I sat quietly. "I need the truth." He sighed. "So does Daniel." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Mark leaned back in his chair. "The night Ryan disappeared, Daniel wasn't with Ava. He wasn't with investors. He was with Victor." My heart skipped. "Doing what?" "Arguing." Mark stood and walked toward a bookshelf. From the top shelf, he removed a small metal box. "I've kept this for 3 years. Inside was an old voice recorder. I never gave it to the police." "Why?" "Because Daniel begged me not to." My stomach tightened. "Play it." Mark pressed a button. Static filled the room. Then, voices. Daniel's voice. "Angry. Ryan deserves to know." Another voice answered calmly. "Knowing won't help him." I frowned. Victor, even through years-old static, his voice sounded unnervingly composed. Daniel spoke again. "I'm not signing those papers." Victor laughed. "You already did. I signed investment documents." "You signed whatever I placed in front of you." Silence. Then Victor whispered something that sent chills through my body. "People only see what I want them to see." The recording ended. I stared at Mark. "You've had this all along?" He nodded. "I wanted to believe the investigation would uncover everything. It never did." That evening, Daniel and I decided to visit Ryan's old office. The building had been abandoned for years. Dust covered every window. The lobby lights no longer worked. Inside, it smelled of damp paper and forgotten dreams. As we walked through the empty corridors, Daniel suddenly stopped. This was Ryan's office. The door creaked open. Everything remained exactly where employees had left it years earlier. Family photographs, coffee mugs, a whiteboard covered in business ideas. I slowly walked around the room. Then I noticed something strange. One floorboard beneath the desk looked newer than the others. "Daniel." He looked over. "I think someone repaired this." Together, we carefully lifted the loose board. Beneath it lay a waterproof document tube. Daniel stared at it. His hands trembled as he opened the cap. Inside were several USB drives, a handwritten notebook, and one sealed envelope. Across the front, Ryan had written only 2 words, "If found as Daniel," carefully unfolded the letter. Ryan's handwriting filled the page. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me. Victor knows I discovered the missing money. He said nobody would ever believe me. If anything happens, don't let him destroy anyone else." My hands began shaking uncontrollably. Ryan had known. He had known before he disappeared. Daniel looked at me with tears filling his eyes. I wasn't crazy. I knew Ryan wasn't guilty. Before I could answer, we heard footsteps echoing through the hallway. Slow, deliberate. Someone else was inside the building. Daniel immediately switched off his flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, closer, then stopped, just outside Ryan's office. A man's voice echoed through the darkness. I was wondering who would find that letter first. The office door slowly opened. Standing there, wearing an expensive tailored suit and smiling as though we were old friends, was Victor Hale. He looked directly at Daniel, then at me. Finally, he smiled. "I suppose it's time we finish this conversation." For several long seconds, no one moved. Victor Hale stood calmly in the doorway, as though he'd been invited. His expensive charcoal suit looked completely out of place inside the abandoned office. Dust floated through the beam of Daniel's flashlight. Victor smiled. "I've been looking for those documents for years." Daniel instinctively stepped in front of me. "You murdered Ryan." Victor chuckled softly. "That's quite an accusation. You have no proof." I held up the notebook we'd found beneath the floor. Victor's smile faded. "So, you found his insurance policy." Daniel's voice shook with anger. "Ryan trusted you." Victor slowly walked into the room. He trusted everyone. That was his biggest weakness. He believed people were basically good. Victor looked around Ryan's office. It made him predictable. I couldn't stay silent. "You stole his company." Victor shrugged. "I rescued it. You destroyed it." "No, I simply understood something Ryan never did." He smiled coldly. "Business isn't about being honest. It's about being first." Daniel clenched his fists. "You framed Ryan." Victor nodded slightly. "I redirected suspicion." "You ruined his reputation." "He ruined himself." I stared at Victor in disbelief. "How can you even say that?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Because dead people can't defend themselves." A chill ran through my entire body. Daniel took one step closer. "What happened the night Ryan disappeared?" Victor sighed. "You really want to know?" He looked almost bored. "Fine." He invited me here. He'd finally discovered the missing accounts. He wanted to go to the police. Victor laughed quietly. I explained why that wasn't a good idea. "What did you do?" I whispered. Victor smiled. He became emotional. He threatened everything we'd built. So I reminded him that desperate people make desperate choices. Daniel's face turned pale. "You drove him to it." Victor didn't answer. He didn't need to. Suddenly, the old building echoed with another voice. "Nobody move." Police officers rushed through the hallway, weapons drawn. Victor spun around in shock. Behind them stood Ava. She looked exhausted, but determined. An older detective walked directly toward Victor. "Victor Hale, you're under arrest." Victor laughed. "For what?" The detective held up a small recording device. "For confessing." I looked at Ava. She gave me the smallest smile. "I called them before you arrived. I hoped he'd come." Daniel stared at her. "You trusted us." She shook her head. "No, I trusted his ego. He always thinks he's the smartest person in the room." Victor's expression finally changed. For the first time, he looked afraid. As officers handcuffed him, Victor looked toward Daniel. "You'll never get your reputation back." Daniel quietly answered, "I didn't come here for my reputation. I came here for the truth." Victor was led away without another word. The office fell silent, a silence that somehow felt lighter, as though years of unanswered questions had finally taken their first breath. The weeks that followed were overwhelming. Ryan's notebook, the USB drives, and Victor's recorded confession reopened the investigation. Forensic accountants uncovered millions of dollars hidden through shell companies. Everything Ryan had tried to expose was finally proven. National news covered the story for weeks. Business executive charged in multi-million-dollar fraud. Missing CEO officially cleared of wrongdoing. New evidence rewrites 3-year investigation. Ryan's name was finally restored, but justice could never bring him back. One afternoon, Daniel and I attended a memorial service organized by Ryan's former employees. The room was filled with people whose lives he'd changed. Young entrepreneurs, former co-workers, friends, family. Ava stood quietly beside a large photograph of her brother. When she saw Daniel, she slowly walked over. Neither of them spoke at first. Finally, she said, "I hated you." Daniel nodded. "I know. I blamed you every single day. I know." She looked toward her brother's photograph. "I thought if I could destroy your life, it would somehow ease my own pain." Tears filled her eyes. "I was wrong," Daniel answered softly. "You weren't the only one manipulated." For a long moment they simply stood there. Then Ava extended her hand. "I'm sorry." Daniel looked at it, then gently shook it. "So am I." Not because either of them had been responsible for Ryan's death, but because grief had stolen years from both of them. A month later, I finally asked Daniel the question that had been sitting in my heart since our honeymoon. "Why didn't you tell me everything before the wedding?" He looked down at the engagement ring on my finger. "I wanted to. Every day." "So why didn't you?" He sighed. "Because the investigation was officially closed. My lawyer told me the past was over. I convinced myself that protecting you meant leaving it buried." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I was wrong. I should have trusted you with the truth." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Secrets don't protect marriages. They slowly destroy them." He nodded. "I know that now." It wasn't easy after that. Trust doesn't magically return because the truth finally appears. Some nights I still woke from nightmares about that photograph. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if another secret was waiting around the corner. When that happened, Daniel never became defensive. He answered every question, no matter how painful. He gave me every password, every document, every email. Not because I demanded them, because he wanted there to be nothing hidden between us ever again. Slowly, day by day, trust returned. Not all at once, but honestly. A year later, we returned to the same little cafe where we'd first met. The owner smiled the moment he saw us. "I was beginning to think married life had made you forget about me." Daniel laughed. "I don't think that's possible." The owner brought over 2 coffees, then winked at me. "Try not to spill this one." I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Some memories deserved another chance. As we sat by the window, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. For one terrifying second, I thought he was about to pull out another secret. Instead, he placed a single folded envelope on the table. Across the front, he'd written, "For the next time life tries to break us." I smiled. "Can I read it now?" He shook his head. "No. When things get difficult, because someday they will. Life always gets difficult." He reached across the table. "But next time, we'll face it together." I slipped the letter into my purse without opening it. Some promises don't need to be read immediately. They simply need to exist. 3 years later, our daughter Sophie was born. The first time Daniel held her, he cried harder than anyone in the delivery room. The nurse laughed. "I've never seen a father cry this much." Daniel smiled through tears. "I almost lost the chance to have this." He kissed Sophie's tiny forehead. "I'm never taking it for granted." Watching him become a father, I finally understood something. People cannot change the worst thing they've ever done, but they can spend the rest of their lives becoming someone better than the person they used to be. 5 years after our wedding, Daniel and I stood together at the entrance of the Ryan Morgan Innovation Center, a scholarship foundation funded with money recovered from Victor's stolen assets. Young entrepreneurs filled the auditorium. Above the stage hung a simple plaque, "In memory of Ryan Morgan, dreams deserve honest people." Ava stood beside us as the ribbon was cut. She looked peaceful. For the first time since I'd met her, the anger was gone. Only love for her brother remained. That evening, Daniel and I walked home holding hands. The city lights reflected across the river. He looked at me and smiled. Do you ever think about our honeymoon? I laughed softly. The worst honeymoon in history? He grinned. Probably. I wish I could erase it. I shook my head. So do I. Then I stopped walking. But if it hadn't happened, Ryan's truth might never have come out. Ava might have lived with hatred forever. And we would have built our marriage on secrets. Daniel squeezed my hand. So, you don't regret staying? I smiled. No, I regret the lies, but never the fight. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders. As we continued walking, I remembered the 7 words that had shattered my world on the morning after our wedding. Ask your husband where he spent the night. For a long time, I believed that photograph ended my marriage. I was wrong. It ended something far more dangerous. The lies. Because I learned that love isn't proven when life is easy. It's proven when the truth is painful, and 2 people still choose to face it together.